Hello. Now we're live. Now it's working. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I am with the Quick Kids. Many of you are familiar with Bernie Quick, the artist. One of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think one of the more local pieces of art that everyone recognizes is at the Grand Marais State Bank. There's the big mural there that people come in and see all the time, and has been in the bank for I don't know how many years.
It was moved from the old bank.
Yeah, it was in the old bank. Mm-hmm. I remember that as a child, so at least 40 years probably. I am with Bernie Quick's children. There's Mary is right behind me, and Dan is right there. And then Leslie is, oh, you're way over there. We might have to have you scoot in. Due to COVID stuff, we are sitting outside, so hopefully the recording works out all right. I know what I can do here. There, I think we're all in the frame now. And okay, we'll just get started here. So we started talking before we came live. You guys, Bernie Quick is a pretty well-known name up here, but is not. You didn't actually grow up here. You grew up you were in the cities 9 months, and then you were up here in the summertime. Correct. And what are some of those memories of coming up for the summers? Was that fun and exciting as a kid, or was that depressing?
I think it was fun, but the act of coming up, just the mere driving from Minneapolis to Grand Marais, was an adventure with my parents. I would typically ride with my dad, and he would be chomping on a big cigar and really nervous because Mother was out of sight, and she had just gone over the hill ahead of him, and he didn't know where she was, and he would race to try to catch up. So it was just that's how we started. That's how we started our summer in Grand Marais. It was just kind of a whiz bang of a start.
Well, and how long did it at that time? So you started coming up in, I think I was reading something that it was like 1950 something you started coming up here, or was it even before that? You know?
Not sure. I can remember that my mom and dad talked about me sleeping in a peach crate when they first were here, and they rented a cabin.
Mm-hmm.
But the first part of the art colony was here and there. My father and mother had the art colony on Lake Pepin for a couple of years, and further down the shore for at least one summer.
And I know that it's been covered in multiple interviews. You guys always get interviewed. But how did the art colony start? I mean, your father was the one that started that, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
I think it was the love of this area.
Yes,
beauty.
And he thought of this, at least in my readings, he thought of this while he was in the service. And he dreamt of having something like this in operation. And I think that tied with his love of the area, his love of trout fishing. All of those things kind of came together and gelled and made this the perfect spot to have the art colony. So the art colony now is the longest lived art colony in the state.
I didn't know that.
Through that
really.
Start.
But this was a joint venture.
Mm-hmm.
The Minneapolis College of Art and Design was the impetus, or the place where they got students to come up this way. So there was a connection there for years in the beginning.
So didn't Dad have to pitch that idea to the MCAT to back the art colony?
Very likely, but
That's
still they had a money interest
Sure,
in the
right.
colony.
And
Yeah.
they would be credited too. The students would get credit for attending classes here at the MCAT in Minneapolis. So at that time, it wasn't MCAT. It was Minneapolis School of Art. The initial
Yeah,
beginning.
you're right.
So that's what started it, but that didn't last terribly long. They pulled their, I don't know exactly why, but they pulled their affiliation.
Mhm. That's right. And then your dad and somebody else bought it.
Well, Byron and Bernie started it from
Okay.
the very beginning. And then about 1950, was it 59 or so, Byron came on board. And there was a number of other people that were principals early on. Rob Kelly. Oh gosh, I can't remember the names, all of them. There's a lot of them probably around.
Mhm.
But yeah, he started it. But then other people came on, and then Byron became his direct partner. They shared the responsibility.
And a little side note, you were telling me Byron used to have a newspaper, right?
He used to print a newspaper called the Potboiler in the basement of his art store just off of Nicollet Avenue in downtown Minneapolis. And it was a throwback period of time. It was just this very unique group of individuals. Um, they were all real hep cats. They were all bohemian types. They were all living the dream.
And we talked a little bit before we started here of what it was like being the children of an artist during that time period and the uniqueness possibly of that. You were talking, they like to party. I guess we're letting it out of the bag right now. They like to party. Mary, you had some stories about that.
Well, it wasn't just that they liked to party. It was a lot of my father's people who purchased his art would come up from the cities and expect to be entertained. So that was one part of it. Another part of it was that my father loved to bring art to Grand Marais, and therefore brought dancers and musicians that always end up at our house, playing, banging away at the piano. You can imagine, many of you can imagine Frank Gillis in your living room pounding away on the blues. So it was a lovely way. Life was a celebration. My mother sometimes tired of it, and that's why we have a cabin on Devil's Track Lake. It had no phone, no way that people from Minneapolis could get a hold of them. And so my mother sometimes would spirit my dad away for a short time so they could have just the down.
Yeah. And Leslie, you were talking about the intellectual conversations. I mean, there was a lot of sort of worldly culture that was happening and discussions and thoughts and ideas.
Yes,
And
yes, there was. And I didn't recognize it so much then when I was a child, but I certainly do now. And it was always very lively, sometimes heated, but always with a laugh at the end. And very liberal. I feel like I was brought up in a very liberal family. And I'll agree with Mary. It was lovely. I looked forward very much to coming here. I don't really remember a time not looking forward to coming. Granted, the trip up, I rode with Mom. She was
easier.
She was a little easier, but she always had to stop at certain places. She liked to stop at Anderson's and Two Harbors and load up with flowers that she could plant. And by the time we were done, I might have like a little spot like this, and the rest of the car is like full of plants. But no, I thoroughly enjoyed my summers here, and going to sleep listening to that. And frequently too, we've talked about all the chat, but there was always great food. Dad was a fisherman. He loved trout fish, and frequently he would have caught a mess of trout, and they might be out at the fire pit that he built himself with a great big huge cast iron and lots of butter frying up lake trout for everybody. So, or not lake trout,
Brook
pardon
trout.
me, brook trout.
For
Brook
sure.
trout, yeah.
He would squirrel them away. Back in the day, we would typically drink our milk out of cartons. It was always cartons. It wasn't plastic bottles. And so he would take these cartons, open up the top, of course, clean them out, and then he would slip the fish into the carton, fill it up with water, and put it in the refrigerator. So, in the freezer.
Yeah.
So it would freeze into this gigantic block of fish. And then when it came time to party, they would bring these blocks out and thaw them. They would be able to dine on fish.
Wow.
Yeah.
It just sounds magical. You're doing a great job of painting a picture of what it was like. Friends. I mean, he brought a lot of friends, the Gillises, right, from the cities up to, and introduced them to Cook County and North Shore, and
As well as Doc Evans,
mhm.
And Johnson, who was a lawyer.
Frank Johnson.
And Burley,
Mhm.
Jane Burley, worked at the hospital because she loved my dad and took many classes from him and came up here and fell in love with the North Shore.
Betsy Bowen, I would suspect, is here because of my dad and the art colony.
How many paintings do you suppose your dad has done?
I don't know. Do
No,
we?
it would be in the thousands.
Thousands, yes.
Yeah, because everywhere I looked, people when they had a little blurb or something on your dad, it was totally different paintings. And I'm used to the Banks painting and I think there's one at the Lutheran church and it was the same sort of style and brushstrokes. And then I was looking it up online and I'm like, this is totally different.
He went through periods just like a lot of artists. He would go through different periods of style. And so they were kind of unique in that way. That you'd be able to tell what year it is kind of by the style.
Yeah.
And the last place that had a show of his was 5004 Gallery in Robbinsdale. And if you want to see some of Bernie's works, you could go on the website, and they have some works on consignment and where you can scroll through them. So if people are interested in just looking and enjoying his style, this particular gallery works basically with artists from Minnesota. And it's a real joy working with them.
So he didn't just bring up new people, he also became great friends with people that were already here and artists. And who are some of those and what was their relationship like?
He was a very gregarious guy. I mean, he liked to be, when he would do a demonstration to his students during the day, he would often do a quick demonstration for his students. But he just loved being a showman. He loved being the person that everybody was looking at. But he was good at it. He wasn't phony at it. He was damn good at it. And he just loved that. He just thrived in that environment. Where people were watching, he's doing the show, he's doing them, and he just loved it. So that feeling back and forth was great. One of, I think, his best friends here that he spent a lot of time with during almost every day he would have coffee with Abe Coffee. Abe Coffee was he used to run the News Herald. And it was right across the street from, not the El Rey, but what was the cafe right across the street? Mabel's. And every day they would end up there having coffee and pie for a break.
And given the map of town today, where would Mabel's Cafe have been?
Directly across from where no, not the Blue Water, right across from the paper, the News Herald. Still, they would just walk across the street It's where the Mercantile
Oh,
is now.
Gunpla Mercantile?
Yep.
Okay.
He also got to be friends with, but I don't know if they were from here, Mr. Bushman, and remember,
Yep,
that had
Bushman.
Campbell's.
Yeah, Bushman.
Yeah, and he played
Clarinet.
clarinet. And he may have, I don't know if he and his wife moved here or if they were from here. I remember Dad spending not a great deal of time, but our neighbors, Christy and Ethel Jacobson. Ethel worked at the courthouse for years and years and years. She's a sweet, sweet woman. Her husband, Chris, now he was DNR or
For natural
conservation
resources,
on it.
yeah.
Yeah. And he had a small power boat that he would take us to Isle Royal every year. So I don't know if you ever got to go. I think it happened more. I'm the youngest. So
You're
I
the
have
baby.
some experiences that they don't have, and they've had experiences, of course, that I haven't had. But anyway, we would go with them to Isle Royal. We also went with them camping up on Sag a couple of times. So, and he was good friends with Chris, and he was different because he wasn't this arty type, but they seemed to get along.
Can we back up to Aid Toffee for a minute?
Of course.
Did you guys interact much with him? He was married to Bertha, correct?
Correct.
Who I swear was the longest living woman in Cook County. I think what did she make it to, 108 or something?
I don't recall, Maria.
Don't quote me on this, anyone who's listening, but she lived for a very long time. But what was Aid like? He had the newspaper.
He was also an artist. He was a painter.
Okay.
A colorblind painter.
Really?
I didn't know.
Huh.
Sorry.
No, not at all.
You can interrupt. That's okay.
I think each of us had spent some time at Aid and Bertha's house, which was fun because our house was a cabin, and their house seemed to be quite palatial and kind of, oh, okay, people up in Grand Marais live like this too. You know, it was, and they were always very hospitable, and it was fun to see the pictures on the wall.
Yeah. Did they always live in the house just below the Lutheran church?
Yep, the big white house.
Yeah. I actually lived in that house for a couple of years.
Okay.
So it does have a grand feeling to it. I mean,
Yes.
in this day and age, it's, a small house, but it's really something.
When I was a child, it was something, yes.
We
Yeah.
looked at that house. We were going to buy that house, and we went down to the basement. The basement sort of is a little different story than the upper levels. The basement is quite unique. If you've ever been to that basement,
Is it like Grandma and Grandpa Quick?
it's rocks protruding into the basement. Solid bedrock. It's just everywhere coming into the basement. It's quite unique.
Interesting.
But you asked for other artists, and my sister brought up Spellman.
Oh.
And I remember walking over to his house, which was about 2.5 blocks away, and his yard would be covered in forget-me-nots. It's part of my soul. It was so beautiful, and now I treasure cookbooks that have some of his woodcuts in it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, we were blessed with going and visiting him out along the shore. And he had a beautiful house, or what would you?
It was a cabin. It was like a cabin.
But a large,
Yeah,
cabin.
Yeah. Over on top of bedrock, just sort of sprawled into the lake.
Right. And there was a guest cabin there too, a part of it. And you had to go through a fairyland. I guess I have it seems different than his artwork. My memory of his surroundings, and I find that interesting to have such a big pattern. Very straightforward, and yet just ethereal or magical.
Mm-hmm. There was supposed to be an exhibit this fall the Spellman exhibit at the Johnson Heritage Post. I'm not sure if that's still happening with the COVID stuff going on, but I just this year saw some of his stuff, and it just is beautiful. Yeah. George Morrison, you mentioned too that he and your dad were friends,
Yes.
or
Well, I know that they knew of each other, and I've heard my dad speak of George often. Respected him as an
your mom. What was she like? Was she an artist too?
not in the sense that you're saying, but I guess, and I remember actually, I think I even mentioned this at her memorial. She was an artist to me because she really appreciated beauty wherever she saw it, and she really passed that along to me. I mean, she was always picking flowers. She was always admiring birds. She was looking at Dad's paintings. She loved beautiful clothes. She had an eye for beauty.
She was a fabulous cook. Excellent, really. She was way up there as far as she was approaching world-class cook. She was an excellent cook. She took cooking classes when she could, and she enjoyed those very much. She brought them home, and she would often try recipes. Oh, we're going to have a party next week. So she'd make the recipe that they're going to have at the party. And we were all the guinea pigs for what was going to be presented at the party. So that's how she would test out her recipes.
They were quite ambitious too.
They
We're
were
not
very-
talking. We're talking like vichyssoise and honest to goodness borscht, and I can't think of what all.
Multi-course
yeah,
meals.
yeah.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
So when I read your dad's bio, he did a lot of traveling. Did you guys get to go traveling? Did you all travel together as a family for things, or was he often?
We went to Europe twice through Dad's work, is what I'm remembering. 1 year was a sabbatical year for him, so he wasn't working. And this was a fun year where, did we buy the VW bus when we got there, or did we buy it here and then got it there?
We made arrangements for it.
Okay. And then we took the ship over to Europe and traveled around Europe for a year in this VW bus, the five of us.
Wow, you took a ship over there,
Dad didn't like to fly, for one thing.
and they weren't like cruise ships like they have now.
Yeah.
Oh, it was.
But they, if you saw them now, you would laugh because they are nothing like the cruise ships you see now. They're more like battleships. They're all one color. They were really drab in appearance. We went over on the Rotterdam. I think we were on the Rotterdam, the Stottendam. Actually, we sailed on the SS United States, which is no longer in service, hasn't been for many, many, many years. And I don't know if it was the last ship. I don't know. Was it France? I don't remember.
Yes.
SS France. So
It would take, didn't it take like 5 days?
at least.
Yeah.
At least. More like
Yeah.
7 or 8.
He's the only one I think that didn't get seasick. I would be at the rail most of the time. I remember.
And here, I remember it as being elegant and.
On the interior, I agree.
Okay.
But the exterior,
okay.
I just looked at a picture of the Rotterdam the other day, and you would not believe how dull it is.
I guess I didn't spend much time looking at the
But
outside of the
the
ship.
interior, you're right.
The interior, it was, I mean, ice sculptures, and I felt like I was in a movie.
It was a fun way to travel. My dad didn't like to drive, and he wasn't a particularly good driver. So we had many an interesting experience with him driving through Europe. And he was a nervous driver. And to calm his nerves, he often took a little shot of typically brandy or something to fortify him for the
Right.
driving. And he'd have a cigar in one hand, and he'd have his little thimble full of brandy in the other hand, and he'd be doing this kind of a thing on the steering wheel. And yeah, it was unique. It was unique. I remember him. He got the Volkswagen bus. Never read anything. Was not a warranty instruction reader, anything like that. He would just go. Well, the big problem with that was at night, when he was driving at night, he didn't know how to turn down the high beams. The high beams were on all the time. He had no idea how to turn them off. So he actually resulted in putting tape over the top of the headlamps, thinking that would sort of reduce at least some of that glare. Well, he brought it in. Finally, we were, I think, in Spain. He brought it into a place, and he wanted to get it finally fixed. And of course, the first thing the mechanic does is he leans outside and he reaches in and he grabs a lever and he flips it up and down. And my dad just goes, "Oh my God." And that was the high and low beam. So we traveled through most of Europe with high beams on all the time.
Making friends everywhere
Oh,
you
yes.
went, I'm sure, with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, for fun. To go way back, I just have to ask real quick, how many hours was it from the cities to Grand Marais when you started traveling?
I think he usually figured 5.
I thought it was more
I-
like 6.5,
I
7.
think so because it was the old highway, right?
Yeah.
So I bet you it was longer, Dan.
It could well be.
Yeah, I think probably longer. It wasn't like huge longer, but I think
Because it was
6.
6 when I was growing up,
Yeah.
and that was at 55
Yeah,
from
probably
Loop
more
to the
accurate.
cities.
And then as Leslie said, we had stops we had to make. So
Yeah.
that's why I said 6 to 7 hours.
Yeah, my dad didn't like to stop. He was not a stopper. He's like me. I'm not a stopper. He's not a stopper. So he ingrained that in me, which is I'm really grateful for.
So, the Historical Society has plein air coming up this month, and we discussed it earlier that we might know how that got started, and it was by your dad. Do you want to share the story of?
Well, it kind of arose naturally from the way my father liked to teach. He taught a lot by demonstration, and he loved to paint outdoors. He'd much rather paint outdoors than be in the studio. So he would, with his students, say, "Okay, we're going to pick these 3 different places today. You have your choice of going out to Artist Point," which wasn't called Artist Point back then. I think they just called it the Point. Or you could go down to the power plant or
The fish houses.
the fish houses. And the students would go off and set up their, little traveling easels or whatever, and Dad would make laps and check in on all of them. And outdoor painting, I mean, he didn't call it plein air, but I would suspect it arose out of that. He did not come up with the term plein air. He wasn't.
Do we know what the term plein air means?
Well, it means painting in the outdoors. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
French term, I believe.
Yes. French.
I'm so glad you knew the answer to that question, because it's terrible to ask a question that you're not sure if your people know the answer to. Oh, and I do see that the Spellman exhibit will be at the JHP in November. So
Awesome. I'd
Good to
urge
know.
everybody to go.
That would be good.
yeah, I'm excited about that. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like me to ask, or pictures that Dan, you brought some photos with you?
I did. At this point in time, I don't know if people want to sit and look through these. They're small. They're black and white. That was back in the day.
That little picture right next to you is it's seen its better day, but that is my absolute favorite picture of my mom and dad. They frequently were out and about in the woods together, gathering wildflowers or moss or, we always had wildflowers in a vase.
My father would go out fishing, and oftentimes he would bring back flowers to sort of placate my mother for being gone fishing for hour after hour after hour.
It sounds like they had a wonderful relationship.
I think they did. Very all-round relationship.
Hmm.
I mean, they had 3 children. Clearly, they were close. They had an interesting relationship with the art school here, the art colony. The way they interacted regarding his works, the business side of painting. I think they worked very, very well.
And 2 of the 3 of you now live here
Yes.
after just coming up in summers. So it must have captured your attention that way.
Yeah, as I think I said earlier, I've always loved coming up here. I knew at a very young age that I really wanted to spend my time here.
I did as well, except that it just took me a lot longer to get here. I'd worked for 39 years at a company in Minneapolis, and every year we would say, "This is the year, this is the year." And finally, it finally happened. We cut the cord. Actually, we're living on the homestead of my parents. The house that my father cobbed together over many, many years. He would build one room, and then he'd build another room, and then he'd build this thing over here, then he'd build a wash shed, and then he'd do this, and then he'd build an outhouse. And so it was just sort of piled onto each other. But by the time we got to the point where we were going to retire and wanted a place to live, the house, as far as the bones of it, were in such a wreck that it was just, we got tired of fixing the water pipes.
Well,
7
nothing
broken
was
water pipes
square
every year.
either.
Nothing.
Dad was, I mean, he was a wonderful painter, but he wasn't really like mechanically inclined from what I remember, or, so not much was square.
Not at all.
Right.
I remember one story that he called the people behind us, and that was the Knowltons. And they were plumbers. And he said he would use gas parts for water fittings. And he would interchange anything that would fit, it was good. Well, I remember, and Gary Knowlton tells the story of coming over to the house to see water coming out of the oven because my father had hooked things up wrong. And that was very typical of how things went. Everything was kind of iffy.
Because he didn't care about that kind of stuff. It wasn't really important.
No, it wasn't.
Painting and friends and reading and...
Yes.
Well, and you probably couldn't hire someone at that time. I mean, clearly the neighbors were plumbers, but, people tried to do a lot of stuff on their own.
And he did. And most of the time it worked. But most of the time it worked, but not all the time.
My brother is very good with his hands, and I think that that's partly because of my father. He might not have been good at building houses, but he did. He made some beautiful chests. He made some beautiful sculpture. He spent some time working with clay very, very early on in Red Wing. Since I don't have to deal with the issues that Dan has to deal with, I look at it as he had an eye. He knew what it was going to look like most of the time before it happened. How it happened, I'm sure he was not as interested in, but he knew what it was going to look like when he made it. Before he saw it in his mind's eye.
He was an all-round artist, without a doubt. He did paintings, drawings, etching, engraving, pen drawings, pencil drawings, charcoal drawings, pastels, lithographs, printmaking of all kinds.
He even used that candle smoke once.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not more than once.
Yeah.
So he was very well-rounded, well-schooled.
Candle smoke. Is there a way to describe it?
It's the black that comes from a candle that's been lit and put out.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes a black
Smoke.
curl that flows in the air, and he's used that on his drawings.
I'm trying to
It's
think
very-
of how you would catch that, or
I think somehow he must have, because I can remember the piece.
Smells. Oh, it's not
Yeah.
one piece.
Yeah, well, I can
There were
remember
5 or
one.
6 pieces that I know of.
I can remember one in particular,
With the
and I think he
butterflies?
must have. Yes, I think he must have lit the candle, blown it out, and then somehow guided the paper over it so the smoke would catch in places.
children, do not try this at home.
Very smart, Maria. Yeah, but it would make for a very ethereal kind of look.
I really want to go try that now.
You're not a child, so you have our permission.
Unrelated, but one of the stories that's kind of interesting in that was one of the occurrences that happened on our travels in Europe. We were in Paris, and my mother disappeared for most of the day. Well, you two were in cahoots.
No, I wasn't in cahoots. I remember being shocked. I had
They went on their merry way, and I did not know what this was all about at all, and I didn't find out until much later. Anyway, they left, came back hours and hours later, and my mother was not my mother anymore. She was the woman that just stepped off the pages of like Vogue magazine. She had just gotten a whole makeover: hair, clothes, makeup, everything. The sweater she was wearing fit every curve of her body. It just did not leave anything to the imagination.
and it was good.
Yeah, it was good. And that was my mom. And what this was all a prelude to, we found out later, was my mother and my father were going out for dinner. But they weren't going out for dinner with just not anybody. They were going out for dinner with Picasso. And
Oh,
so he was
wow.
there having his 85th, I think it was his 85th birthday. And there was a huge exhibition of his work going on. And that night, we went out to dinner with Picasso.
Wow.
Highlight for my dad, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, what was there left to do after that?
Yeah.
More painting.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That was unique.
Any other famous artists that he influenced or had dinner with, or
Do you remember the elephant? The toy elephant with the nose lit up
Yes.
that Kakashka
Oscar Picasso.
brought and gave the kids. He came to my folks' house in Minneapolis. Yeah, he's also a very famous artist.
We tried to visit him in Europe. I don't know if you accomplished that or not.
I don't think so.
The first trip to Europe was primarily about traveling, going to exhibits, going to museums. Every town, every city we went to, that's where we went. Spain, it was Prado, or you'd go to, of course, Paris, be the Louvre. Every city, Denmark, Holland, one city after another. Every museum that they could get to.
so it sounds like a lot of world traveling for. I don't see that, and maybe it's just my own perception of that was happening a lot for a lot of other people.
You know, we were very fortunate, I think.
But really, it was 2 big vacations. We didn't take road trips like many of my friends did all over the United States. We came to Grand Marais, or we went on a big. We didn't get to climb in the car and go to.
You're right, Mary, because he worked all year round.
He did.
Busy,
worked,
busy.
So,
you know,
so it
yeah.
might sound more worldly than it really was, because I didn't know many of the. I mean, I hadn't traveled to many of the states until I got married.
I remember him as working really pretty much 6 days a week for as long as I can remember.
Right.
6 days a week. I mean, he would be home on Sunday. And that's what I remember. He was a great father, but he wasn't around a lot.
And he worked evenings too. He had usually
Night
for
classes.
many years. He had night classes.
Yeah.
2 and 3 nights a week. So
So getting back, I think, to one of your first questions, life growing up with an artist. I mean, he was on a teacher's salary. He wasn't making, we're not making a lot of money here.
Yeah.
And my mom didn't work. So, you know, he was taking care of his family. And just happened to be lucky. He loved what he did. Because he did it a lot.
And people seem to enjoy what he did too. He had so many friends. I don't know a person today that has as many friends as he had. And people of substance, I use that term monetarily and maybe intellectually. Uh, these were artists, they were lawyers, doctors, people of a different strata maybe. But my father was a very everyday guy, but people loved him. He was just a gregarious. And my mother. When they got the two of them together, they got a double whammy. They got really a good package.
It's amazing how some people just, they don't have to necessarily go to many places. People are just drawn to them to want to be in their presence. And
That was kind of it. He had definitely a draw. I wouldn't call it an aura, but he had a way of bringing people in that wanted to see what he's doing, wanted to be part of it, wanted to be part of that scene.
I think one of the pieces that I feel is lacking so far in this conversation really is his love of the students and love of imparting his art with others. That he was known as Batman at the College of Art and Design. He had Robin at his right hand side. Kids that were at the art school would come up to him, would feel really comfortable if they had a problem coming and speaking with him. And he just loved teaching. It was another way that he was fed.
Yeah, he was very kind. I remember a student actually embroidered him a beautiful shirt that ended up being something he wore all the time. It was, back in the day, it was kind of really fashionable to have all this like floral applique, and on the back it said "Live and Let Live." And I know Dad loved that shirt, and that was kind of, I think, a slogan that he would take on, because he was very accepting, very open, very loving. Yeah, we miss you, Dad. He was great. It's great.
mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys certainly do paint a very good picture with words. So I appreciate you sharing with me this afternoon, and it kind of feels like the natural end to things unless someone wants to add something.
It's been our pleasure, Maria. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I might hit you up again once I do find out some more research and whatnot. Have to ask more questions or themes. Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. The Spellman exhibit will be at the JHP in November. And remember, it's September. Become a member of the Cook County Historical Society. We'll see you next Tuesday at 7 o'clock. I'll be talking to the Rydens family. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
And